And although I've been in technology for 40 plus years now, the issue is that everybody's a technologist and everybody's talking about AI now. Most organizations are still basically horse-powered in the way that their business model operates. They've added on a motor, which is the car, and they've learned how to navigate a car, but not really doing a great job. If you think about it from a code point of view, it's like the difference going from Linux to OpenClaw. It's a change in the way that the code is operating, and therefore a change in what can be done with it.
Welcome to the DevReady podcast, where we're helping non-techs build great tech. Today, joined by Thomas Green, the introduction of the technology futurist that died. Now, fascinating one. Sure, there's a lot of background story and history to that, and we'll get into that definitely. Thomas, thank you for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having us on, Andrew.
So, Tom, a little bit about you. Let's talk about your history, where you stand, why you want to introduce you as a technology futurist that died. Let's talk about that. I'd love to understand the background.
Yeah, sure, Andrew. So it's part of a rebranding, right? Because there's a lot of people who are talking about technology. And although I've been in technology for 40 plus years now, the issue is that everybody's a technologist and everybody's talking about AI now. And I mean, every second, in fact, not every second.
That's every second person.
Yeah, every second.
It's very true.
I was looking at how do I redefine myself that not only fits in alignment with my brand, but also fits in alignment with what I'm delivering to the world. And so I had this death experience when I was 21, and I had flatlined. I left this plane. I went somewhere else, and I won't go too deep into it unless you want to ask some questions. But basically, what happened was I had this conversation with an omnipresent version of myself, and I chose at that point to come back, and I came back into my body. And when I came back into my body, it was like the reverse of drowning. I had to reoxygenate and re-enliven my body and bring life back into my body. And that was actually quite a job to do. But what it left me with was this understanding that actually we're never separate. And so what I mean by that is that most people walk around thinking that they're individuals, and we are individuals, but we also live and breathe and exist inside a singular field. Whether quantum science call it quantum field, or it's in computer words we'd call it the environment, right? So code happens on hardware and inside an environment. So this idea that we were separate never left me, and so what that meant was that everything I did from then on came from this place of being part of the collective, part of the whole, not as an ideology such as a lot of the isms, but from an actual bodily experience of having been to somewhere where I was part of the whole.
Let's unpack that a little bit, because I'm sure not many people have gone through this experience, and it's fascinating. And you get to speak to someone that's gone through an experience like that before. Take me back to that moment. What was that experience like when you mentioned you were communicating with like an omnipresent sort of yourself in that case? Explain that a little bit. What was going on?
Yeah, sure. So I was in my mum and dad's bedroom. When when your time's up, right? They say that in the movies, and it is true. And I knew that I was about to take my last breath. And so I went through to my mum and dad's bedroom. I was living at home at the time. And I thought, it would be great to be held when you pass, right? And again, it's one of those things they all talk about, but it's true. And so I was held by my mum, and as I passed, and literally as I passed, I took my last breath. And then I came disembodied, and I started floating up, and I was floating on the ceiling of the room. And I remember watching, obviously, the distraught nature of the scene below me. Time's a bit of an illusion when you're outside of this physical domain. And so I couldn't tell you how long it was before the ambulance turned up, but I certainly remember having this visual effect of I watched the ambulance, and I was like, wait a minute, I'm hovering above my body, and I'm able to see the ambulance come up the street, round the top of the estate, and down to the roundabout through the walls. So I was literally in this space that was able to see through everything. And in that space, I was expecting to be approached by, the idea of a pearly white gates and a man in a beard, or a man with a pitchfork.
Yeah, some sort of white going on. Yeah, yeah. Interesting.
Having spent time with people who've had death experiences or near death experiences, there definitely is some proof that those experiences do equate and happen. So I'm not sure whether it's our own programming that is how we experience it. But for me, I experienced, and it could have been also the fact that, the circumstances around it, but I experienced it as this voice that was not inside of me or outside of me, it was everywhere. And that makes sense. If I can see through walls, I've no longer got any physicality. If I've not got a physicality, then the voice can resonate through me. And I know that I had a conversation with that voice, which is weird because I still had the center of me as my own self. And so I was having a conversation about, you can either, do you want to stay or do you want to go? What's the choice? And I distinctly remember the moment where I looked down and I saw my mum grieving over her dead son, and I realised that my mum loved me. I mean, I truly got it, and in that moment, I couldn't leave her, and I decided to come back for my mum. Now, she's passed; she's on the other side now, but it was a very distinct choice that I made. And like I said, it was quite a journey back into consciousness and back into breathing in the body. No, that's not true. Back into consciousness. I was conscious, but back into my body being conscious, I should say.
Yeah, you definitely seems like you were conscious. Yes. Yeah. A funny, interesting piece of the programming side and what we might experience, is that ingrained in us, or how does that? Yeah, probably no one knows the answer to that question. That's probably a little bit of an interesting one, but yeah, fascinating the way you could see what was happening around you.
If I can talk in computer terms, Andrew, because that's the benefit of being on this program, is that we can talk in computer terms, right? So my understanding is that when you take a computer and you stand up the operating system, you stand up the applications, and you get it patched how you want it to be. We're talking, probably showing my age now, 10, 15, 20 years ago. You would then image.
Patching, yeah, it doesn't happen that much these days.
Yeah, right. And then you'd image that machine. And so if you've got 1,000 computers in a network that you're wanting to upgrade, you would set one computer image, and then you would image all the other computers. And, this is back in the days of, I don't know, Cat 3, Cat 4, like early days of networking, right? And not quite BNC, and so you take an image. And I believe that if you think about the multiverse, the idea is that we are all the same, we're all an individual, but when we're imaged in that ultimate individual, well, there's just slight variations because, of course, we're not all in the same place. We're all slight variations. But we're all an image of each other. And so what that means is that slight variations in that image are what configures us in our beliefs and our values, and they are what show up in terms of our existing life or in terms of our passing over to death.
We all start at ground zero, don't we? Technically, there's no belief, no system. But according to some things I've looked at, you carry beliefs through energy, through passed on from generations. According to some stuff that I've seen, how deep have you gone in this space? I know this is not about tech, but it's a very interesting one.
Yeah. So I spent the last 30 odd years deep diving into this to explain what experience I had. And I've gone into quantum science, metaphysics, spiritual, all the religions, maybe not all of them, but a lot of the main ones. And, just deep diving understanding the science. And I think where I've arrived at is that I've seen too much categorical, imperative truth and evidence that we're not dead before we're not nothing. We don't start at ground zero when we arrive. That as we're born, we're alive before we're born. In what context, I couldn't tell you. And that there is part of the code that flows through before we're incepted, that influences who we are, whether it's personality or values, or how significant that is, whether it's vows that we took in a previous life and they're like, decision gates that we have to undo or do. But there are religions that say that we reincarnate, and I have had direct experience of people who've done evidence and researching that have witnessed and spoken to people who have reincarnated. And I'll just give you an example so you can understand how real this is. So, for example, there was one guy in the States who was 7 years old, 6 or 7 years old. It seems to be the magic number around there. And the parents could not convince this kid that he wasn't this made-up persona that he thought he was, and that he was this child that they identified him as. And so the researcher had found out about this story, and when they found this kid, they took this child to meet. They found the sisters that he was talking about, and they took this child to meet the sisters that he was talking about from a previous life, and they were able to talk about stuff from that life, which is, I mean, it could be leeching of code.
I don't know. Oh, we don't really have all the answers, do we? But there are certain experiences that we all go through that you sort of question what's real, what's not, what's the real reality. I imagine you mentioned touching spiritual religion. There's all different angles, and you can just have an out-of-body experience, like for example in a meditation, quite easily if you're practicing quite a bit. So there's different angles, and there's definitely something there. No one has the answers, otherwise we'd all know what's next.
So you talked about meditation. Again, and this leads me to the reason why I'm talking about death on a technology and futurist podcast, right? So, again, it's been shown in meditation, transcendental meditation in Washington D.C. They did an experiment where over a period of time, I think it was 9-10 weeks, they had a group of meditators, about 4,000 meditators, and over that time there was a reduction in serious crime by 75%, documented. So what this means is that we as individuals,
we are connected in some way.
Components, we affect the soup, the space, the environment that we all inhabit. And so therefore we are able to influence, not through our direct spoken communication, but through our radiating out energy and receiving energy, the broader picture.
Yeah, we are energy it's very interesting. Let's link it to tech a bit. But in the end, we are all energy and in different spaces. And I think when we all know that when we're flat, we're not really in a high energy state. We're not moving in a great way. When we're more in a blissful state, you can feel different, you feel lighter. There's different energy levels just by feeling. So I can connect to that a little bit.
Yeah, so I suppose loosely, if we're supposed to use a metaphor, we might talk about code bloat. So if you strip down HTML and you just write an HTML website and you've got 700 lines, which gives you a beautiful website, right? 700 lines of HTML will give you a perfect website.
Which is very fast.
It's incredibly fast. Whereas if you go from a few hundred kilobytes to now you're talking megabytes or even bigger, because you've got all these libraries of code that have got nestled libraries and all of this bloat you don't use, right? So just using that as an analogy for speed or higher vibration versus lower vibration, the same thing is true with us and the way that we program our bodies through either the food we eat, whether that's processed, whether it's chemicals, whether it's straight from the vine or straight from the vegetable plants, or whether we are using language which is present moment language, or whether we're talking about the past negatively or talking about the future negatively, so it's all language and programming, right? And the reason why it's so important for us to understand this is because we've entered a new phase. So I'm going to bring it back to AI because everybody does, right? So we've entered a new phase. I call it phase 3. So phase 1 was the law of diminishing returns. That's, back in 1,000, 2,000 years ago, where your growth goes up and then it tailors off and plateaus. And that's the same thing we've understood for millennia, whether that's go to the gym, whether that's go on a diet, you get growth and then it peters off. The business models that we're running today were built in that environment. And so everything that was calibrated for that speed of growth from a human point of view. We've then added on Moore's law, which is the doubling growth over the 99-year period. You see a billion doublings, and that started in 1965, I think it was. And so we've seen exponential growth. And because humans developed for just the sort of diminishing returns, what's happened is all of our systems have started creaking. Dopamine mining, the platforms that use our attention, and all of the fact that we've got lower attention spans. The whole of the way that the business models that we have plugged in exponential tech, or tech that works in exponential speed, has kind of left us with quite a lot of issues, mental health issues as a sort of population, and
it's a big gaping problem going on now.
Big problems, right? Now, we've entered phase 3. Phase 3 is when you take the law of diminishing returns and you swap it on its axis. And now it becomes the law of diminishing effort. Now you get the same return for less and less and less effort. This is now, as AI becomes recursive in its ability to build itself better and better and better, we're getting to the point where it's going to be able to do more and more and more for less and less effort. The analogy I use is it's like...
We're already seeing that now, and it's going to continue to evolve.
So the analogy for me is it's like we're a Sunday driver on the Great Ocean Road. We've learned how to drive a car and, dawdle along on the Great Ocean Road. And it's not that we give you a Porsche, which is the exponential speed. It's that there's suddenly you're taken from driving your Sunday driving car to now being in an F-18. And most organizations are still basically horse-powered in the way that their business model operates. They've added on a motor, which is the car, and they've learned how to navigate a car, but not really doing a great job because the way that society is having challenges of breaking because of the way that a lot of big business has been created through the technology. But now when we add into that the phase 3, which is this inversion of that law of diminishing returns to law of diminishing efforts, we've got a big problem, which is we're now expecting people who metaphorically learned how to do business on horseback under candlelight, and now are going to be doing it at the speed of F-18.
So we're technically in the wrong vehicle.
That's why we need to have this change.
How do you get people to contemplate and think about that from that perspective? Especially the bigger the business, the structures are all set up for, get back to your analogy, we're driving cars, right? How do you get people out of cars into F-18s quickly before it's really too late and they're left behind? That's probably something that people be asking themselves.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So it's not the linear path that we think. And because we're moving to a faster speed, right? We need to actually jump ahead of AI and think about quantum computing. We have to think about how quantum works. And what this means is that if we're able to change our internal way that we're operating as an individual, we upgrade the way we think, we upgrade the way that we work our emotions, and we meditate. So we actually have a disconnection from our mind, so we're not in our thoughts all the time. We can start accessing better and greater capability. If enough of us do that, we're going to now have capacity which is far beyond our current IQ to be able to innovate. Can I give you an example?
Yeah, love to hear it.
So there was a French philosopher, and he had a random event generator. Now, a random event generator is basically a computer-generated code, which is as random a piece of code as you can imagine. And when it generates it, there's no 2 times that this code will be the same. It's like coin toss, but on steroids, right? And what happened was this French philosopher took a robot, and it had a random event generator on the robot, and it told the robot which direction to travel in, how far, how fast, and for how long. And so they monitored this robot as it traveled around through the room, and it eventually mapped the whole of the room. The next thing they did, they was took some chickens and hatched the chickens, and the chickens went, "Oh, robot, mama!" And then, so they followed the robot round, and the robot didn't change its behaviour, but it also didn't run over the chickens, which is a good thing. And then, maybe being French, I'm not sure, but they decided to try something different. And so what they did was they took the chickens and they put them in a cage to one side of the room. Now the random event generated robot changed its behavior based on the distress of the chickens calling for their mum. Now the robot only mapped 30% of the room around the cage.
Okay, so stay near the cage.
So what my proposition is that if we are able to work on our internal state, work on our vibration, as it were, our frequency, and enough of us do it, we will impact the environment that we currently sit within, and therefore everything that runs in that environment, AI and other people and business models, will all naturally upgrade, because you upgrade the environment, everything that works in it either stops working if it doesn't upgrade to the environment, or it up levels the way it works.
Question for you.
Yes.
We all see the challenges that technology has put on people. Depression's rising, impacts, drug use is going through the roof, according to the latest news. Are we not going in the wrong direction? Mentally, in terms of focus, attention, are we being drawn in the wrong direction completely compared to what you just said?
There's two schools of thought. One school of thought is absolutely, look at what's happening, it's obviously the wrong direction. The other school of thought is that it's troubles that have always been there, but they're coming to the surface now to be healed and now to be worked on. And so I would suggest that whenever you think about a spring or a pendulum or anything like that, it always has to go one way before it goes the other way. So for a spring, it has compression before it then has release. And so they always say it gets worse before it gets better. The darkest point is the moment before dawn. So I would suggest that we are cleaning closet in terms of all of the things that have been hidden and all of the challenges that we've inherited as a generation now are being allowed to surface, and they're being allowed for us to, in a much more safer space than it used to be, because it never used to be safe to say that you were different than one particular stereotype, right? Whereas now you can be anybody you want to be.
Yeah, it's very true. It's a little different.
And so
yes.
I think that means that we're going to see, if you think about it from a code point of view, it's like the difference going from Linux to OpenClaw. It's a change in the way that the code is operating, and therefore a change in what can be done with it. And so if you imagine that no longer we have a whole generation that are told you have to be a doctor, you have to be a nurse, you have to be a lawyer because that's where the money is. Now the generation is told, well, go into AI or go into entrepreneurism or be an artist.
The model is shifting. Yeah, it definitely is. This is what people are communicating. Going to school is being questioned right now. What is school? What's the value that you're actually providing to your children? We're setting kids up for, like we were 100 years ago, building for an environment they're going to walk out of in, especially if you're young kids, 10, 15 years. It's not going to be there. That's the reality. It's not going to be the same. So what should we be investing as parents, as we grow, nurture businesses?
There's a couple of things I want to touch on because I know that we've got a few minutes left. So the first thing is absolutely, I think the great thing about social media, even though it's had a lot of shadow side, is that it's allowed conversation that a lot of us are aware of, a lot of things that just never made it through the controlled media before. Whereas now we're aware of things and we're starting to have these questions over, is school good for us? Is school good for our children? Whereas we never had that conversation before.
There's different questioning going on. No, we just followed the bouncing ball, right? You had your local environment, you grew up with your neighbours, your close family, and that's all you had, and there was nothing else. And you want to have a conversation, you had to either go see someone face to face, which is nothing wrong with that. I think we need to go back
Yeah,
to that a little
yeah,
bit more. And then this podcast would have run a lot better if it was face to
yes.
face. A bit choppy today, but that's okay. And then you had to pick up the phone in the house, one line when we had a phone back then. The mobiles take over everything, so it's all evolved very quickly. But opened up different opportunity, right? We can connect to someone across the other side of the world in seconds. You can have conversations. I was on a podcast with someone in South Africa last week. Anywhere in the world, we can have a conversation, learn something, share something.
Yeah, I did a TV interview in Canada last night, and it wasn't choppy.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that far, right? You know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Imagine that. We're both in Melbourne and it's choppy, but anyway.
And so it's really important that we start questioning the way we do business, because I know you had growth hackers on a few episodes ago. And so one of the things that, because I had this death experience, I've always been conscious and mindful through everything I've done, or at least tried to be. And where I just use the word try, and a lot of you said do or do not, there is no try, because you'll quote Yoda, but anyhow, that's another story. One of those things with growth hacking is that we're literally speeding up the mechanism of business. And so if a business produces landfill and you growth hack that landfill, all you're doing is you're doing more extraction, more sales, and more landfill, but actually it generates more profit. And so the fact is that the system has become more skewed to producing profit than other forms of value. And growth hacking is a way of experimenting to make that quicker, like it's making it much better. And I developed this concept called mindful growth hacker because I remember it was my daughter's second birthday, and I was in a meeting with a plastic surgeon that wanted to 10x their business, and we could do it using growth hacking because we could use behavioral psychology, and we could use digital advertising, and we could use data science and all this stuff to make it happen. But I sat there and went, so you want me to make more girls between the ages of 18 and 25 feel bad about themselves? They feel like they have to go under the knife so that they get breast enlargement and other modifications further down, what we won't go into in a chat like this. And I just couldn't do it. I said, I can't do it. Just what? So you can have more Ferraris and more watches? And he went, well, you obviously haven't got the job then.
Obviously
not. But I don't want this.
No, yeah, to align to something like that, yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, no, there's sometimes you need to walk away from certain gigs. That's a very fascinating one. I would agree with that. That's the whole probably issue with society right now. Just that whole ecosystem.
But I think the opportunity we've got with AI and the speed of AI is that we really have this opportunity to reevaluate who we are as a business owner and a business sort of leader. And we can change from having this pyramidal power structure control of externalized capital, externalized shareholders that we have to extract profit for, regardless of what the impact is, to this more stakeholder model where we can now use tokenization. We can now use the blockchain to tokenize things, whether that is fungible or non-fungible. So we can use in-source capital. We can keep the value and the trust along the supply chain or along all the stakeholders, and we can build new ways of doing things that, when pressure tested by speed or by volume, they don't push to a very, very, very small thin end of 1% of people own 99% of the world's wealth, for example.
Oh, we've always been there. That's the reality. We've been there forever. Will that shift and change? It's questionable. How will it change? What is it going to look like? Are we just not feeding the technology companies right now in terms of what's going on? If you see what's happening on the stock market, all the tech stocks are going through the roof, and it's still feeding the 1%. The BlackRocks of the world own most of this stuff, and et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, what does it look like if you're still feeding the 1%? It needs a big break away from that to really change that.
Yeah, especially when we're talking about the BlackRocks and the Vanguards, and we think we are in a duopoly in Australia with Coles and Woolworths, right? Well, if BlackRock owns 5% of each of them and has board control, is it a duopoly or is it now a monopoly? if we have 5 banks and all banks,
It was a monopoly, yeah, correct. How's it work?
in essence, we've given our money to funds. They've invested it in big vehicles that can guarantee return, and those big vehicles now have very tight control on everything.
Yes.
How do we unpick that system? Because again, whatever position we're facing when you hit the warp button, we're going to end up very quickly magnifying. So the warp button is, they talk about hyperbolic growth, which is the inversion of the law of diminishing returns, law of diminishing effort. It's hyperbolic, meaning rather than Moore's law, where we saw a billion doublings in 99 years, Ray Kurzweil talks about a billion doublings from where we are now in 5.6 years, little under 6 years. And so are we at that point yet where how far on that point are we, or are we yet to get to that point? But that just means that as individuals and leaders, we need to start. We need to start optimizing our hardware. We need to start optimizing our code. We need to start making sure that the signals that we send out on the network and receive from the network are clear of any bugs or viruses. Because at some point, the whole thing is going to get amplified, and whatever is current will get amplified with it.
I think we are in the amplification right now. That's the reality. You're seeing it, especially in a business like ours, sitting in right in tech and the movement application. I don't think we've got to that yet. Significant application. You're seeing it, efficiency, definitely. And big gaps, big jumps in efficiency. Let's put it bluntly.
Yeah.
But we're not at that point of full diminishing effort and just everything happens. But at one point, it's going to continue to evolve. But will it slow or will it just continue? That is the question that everyone's asking. I don't think it's going to slow.
It can't slow.
I don't know what we're going to be in 5-6 years. What's the world going to look like? It is a question everyone's asking.
Yeah, if you go from ChatGPT 3.5 to Opus Claude Opus 4.7, and then you look at those two as large language models, then you look at like Kimi with 2 million tokens, or the 4 million token language models you can have locally, or then we go OpenClaw, or even from there we jump now to swarms. Like it is not just compounding.
Yeah, it won't stop.
And so the thing that is keeping it from being an immediate vertical takeoff right now is the gravity resistance of the human interaction. But when you've...
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, are we really buying in across all aspects? I think the change it's a mindset shift to think completely differently and throw out, like you said, throw the car out, let's jump into the airplane, right? Or let's just shift the model and how we're thinking. And I think it's people need to stop and slow down in this world to speed up. It's like anything. You just stop, slow down to speed up, and not many do. They just keep doing what they've done forever with slow incremental things over the journey. And then if you're going to do that for 5 years, I don't know what that's going to bleed to in 5 years. So that's probably where you're coming from too. It's how do we slow the mind down, slow the thinking down, put the focus in let's pretend we haven't done business before. Let's start again. What could it look like? Let's reimagine it, is where I'm seeing your thinking.
Yeah, like if you think there's a book that we all know well, an author we all know well called Malcolm Gladwell. And in his book years ago called The World is Flat, or The Flattening of the World, or something like that, he talks about when a firefighter stands on the steps of a building, they are processing information unconsciously, and they will notice if the draft changes, if the floor's about to give way, and they will make a judgment call based on stuff that they couldn't intellectually think, right? And so what is the promise is if we're able to slow down, like you said, we're able to do breath work. From that breath work, we're able to step outside of our thinking, because most of our thinking is code that's running, that's being given to us, we've inherited. It's running based on thinking about the past, or it's based thinking about the future. Very, very few people spend any time in this right now, in this present moment. When was the last time you smelt a rose? I mean, truly smelt a rose. Because if you'd smelt roses, you'd know that.
Yeah, there's not many around in gardens these days.
Well, I'm fortunate. I live in an older European estate, and so actually, there's quite a few old roses that smell because they've now been engineered not to smell, because that means they don't give off more energy, which means they last longer. But what's the point of a rose that doesn't smell, right? And so this concept that if we're able to come to a point outside of our breath, it's called present moment awareness, and that's we do breath by breath, one breath at a time. We can sit there and observe our thoughts. Once you get to the point where you can sit there and observe your thoughts, you can't reset. I mean, I did that, and that's the hard way. You can't, first line of IT defense, turn it off, turn it back on again. I don't advise it. It causes a lot of trauma for the family by doing that, right? But,
I imagine so, yes.
But what it means is now we can use that space to start changing the code. And you know as well as I do, you change one syntax or put one dot in the wrong place or miss anything when you're doing a bash prompt or a cron, it stops working, right? And so now so we don't realize that the narration of the image that we're given and the language that we use, whether it's from school or whether it's inherited from the news or whether it's inherited from the TV or the programming device or whether it's just been our parents who didn't know any better, we're running faulty code. And we need to upgrade that code.
I agree with that. Yeah, a lot of it is subconscious, just being, and yeah, you just do everything is not everything, but if you've got no awareness of what's going on, you can probably live in 95% just subconscious movement around the world. People are walking around with these things and just lost and walking the streets and wouldn't even know what walked past them. If a clown came past squeaking away, they probably wouldn't even notice it. Yeah, so that's it's very fascinating how our attention one is captured, but then it just becomes habit, and habits are good, bad, and indifferent, but then they become subconscious and you're just driving those continuously. Like when you wake up, you probably do the same thing every day, but do you choose that? It's a question that most people would say. I probably just get up, I either go to the bathroom, maybe I put a coffee pot on. Is that a conscious choice, or is that something because you've done it forever?
Is it habitual?
So yeah, breaking that is awareness. Yeah.
And how do we then train that as individuals, as being personal development for a while, but how do we train that in organizations? Because now it's imperative if an organization is to innovate and iterate, to learn how to pilot this F-18 fighter jet. How do we change our way that we work in our code from a work perspective? Because most people have two different masks. They have a mask they have at work because you can't tell the boss this and you can't do this at work, and they have a mask at home, which is like cat videos or whatever, right? And so how do we change the code that runs at work? So the ideal future would be, rather than having an organization that's got 1,000 people and they let 200 of those people go because AI takes their jobs. You're already paying for those 200. Keep those 200 on. Keep that capital of knowledge inside your organization, but now teach it how to innovate and iterate your business with the capability you've actually increased with AI. And now you can be one of those market leaders, one of those category leaders, and you can start now not dictating, that's the wrong word, but you can start innovating and changing the landscape. And that's kind of a different philosophy, but also a different trajectory for all of us.
Oh, we need to continuously invest, and especially I think in business it always shifts and changes, and we've never been through such a drastic change as we're having right now. So with change, we need to continuously innovate and invest. And if we're not doing that, we're falling more than backwards. We're falling way behind and probably won't be around in 12 months to 2 years, right? So I think the bigger the change, the more effort required to shift and move it is what I see. So you're in a ship and the oceans are swelling, and to get through that is more focus, more attention, more energy. When it's nice and calm, it's easy to flow and sail through and just collect your profit, as you said a bit earlier, and that's how we've done business before. But yeah, when the oceans are swelling and there's uncertainty, that's when it requires all hands on deck. And if you're throwing people off the deck, it's an interesting take. How do you get people to really look at innovation and really take this from where we are today to catapulting the business, not just that incremental. Because I don't know if incremental improvement is going to cut it in this period right now. Incremental will be shifted and just really that little gradual improvement. I don't believe it's enough.
No, especially
We
not.
got to be changing the way we do business, the models, etc.
Because
Yeah.
the world's changed. The science that we grew up on, which was light is the fastest speed you can get is the
Yeah.
speed of light, which it's not. That's not true. There's instantaneous data
Yeah.
transfer, instantaneous matter transfer. There's movement from one place to another simultaneously, which means that it's quicker than the speed of light. They've demonstrated it with sending information between Earth and a satellite using quantum superpositioning and two electrons. I won't go into too much detail, but using quantum science. And so there's a lot of things that we've taken for granted that we didn't question where it came from as much as we probably could have done. For example, you talked about education earlier. Well, education was built in 1906, or most of the education we currently have now was built in 1906 by the Rockefellers. Now, why? Because they had Standard Oil and they wanted the world to be the best environmental conditions for their Standard Oil to propagate. And so, it means that things we take unquestioned as conditions that we don't test. Because as a computer person, as a nerd, we test everything, especially a growth hacker, right? You test everything. Whereas if you have a hypothesis that you hold to be true and you don't test it, you'll never know whether there's something quicker, better, more capable, has more capacity at the other side of that hypothesis. And I'm fortunate. So not only did I have a death experience, but when I was 24, I broke my back, and I was told that if I wanted to walk again, I'd have to, either be in a wheelchair for life or I'd have to have operations. And I'm fortunate by this point that I knew quantum science, and so I went through, 6 specialists until I found this short Indian guy who knew quantum science. And I asked him, why is it you want to cut something open that doesn't exist? Because we're 99% space and 1% of energy moving very quickly that creates the illusion of what we see to be physical. And this is science, you can look it up. And so I said, why do people want something that doesn't actually exist to be cut open and mended? And he took about 45 minutes considering this. Then he came up and he says, because most people want the easy path. And so I went, okay, great. So what's the other path? And that was changing my blueprint. That was working with my internal code structure or framework that had told me that my code was formatted as a broken back, to rework that structure so that I recode something different. And obviously I'm talking to you now. I'm stood. I've done Ironmans. I'm Muay Thai trainer. I do all this stuff. And so if I'd have taken the idea that actually the rules that were given me is that if you want to walk again, you need to have your back operated on, it would have been a different reality for me, because I'd now be having plate in my back. There would have been a 70% chance of success. I might be in a wheelchair anyway. And it's fascinating that, yes, I get it requires a lot of trust and self-certainty to question things. But I think if we don't question things, we accept things that are not in our best interests.
The world isn't set up mostly for the population's best interests. So that's where questioning and social and sharing of information has become quite a big thing. And there's a lot of noise out there, but there's some interesting pockets if you find the right networks. And I think it's getting off and finding the right groups and people to communicate with and having conversations like these, which get you thinking in different lights. And for me, it's been different thinking again in terms of some of the things you said today have been, consolidating a couple of thinking, but then a couple of things I might want to look into. So fascinating. Tom.
Yeah, and really, I'll leave this with you. The thing that we need to look at is we need to question our intelligence, right? And by intelligence, I believe we have 4 types of intelligence. The first intelligence is IQ, which everybody knows. The second intelligence is EQ, which a lot of people are starting to know about, and it's a lot more widely spoken about. The third one is PQ. Now, PQ is physical intelligence. That means the body intelligence. If you go out and drink on a night out and get really hammered and then try and work the next day, you notice it's the same way as, trying to, in the old days, cook video on your computer and do something else at the same time. The processor doesn't work. So we have to have an optimized PQ in order for the EQ to work, and the EQ affects our IQ. And so they all work in tandem. Now, they're the localized hardware and software relationship. We have something called SQ, which I call it SQ. It's spatial quadrant or scientific quadrant or spiritual quadrant, but it means non-local intelligence. And so that's how do we interact with the field? Do we have, because there's this thing called coherence and dissonance. And so have you come across a torus before? Do you know what a torus is, the shape of a torus?
Not really, I don't
So a
know.
torus is like an electromagnetic field. It looks like a donut. And so we have an electromagnetic field around our body.
I put your hands on it. Yeah.
Perfect. So we have an electromagnetic field around our body. And what happens is that we have an electromagnetic field from our head, and we have an electromagnetic field from our heart. And those two come together and they affect the electromagnetic field, the toroidal field that goes around our body. And so there is an actual physical effect that can be measured. And if our head and our heart are at odds, it has a dissonant signal. So that's a signal that is fractured and not aligned. If our head and our heart are in alignment,
Yeah, I've seen a lot of this data.
yeah,
There's
we
coherence
have
between the
coherence.
waves. Yeah, I've seen that through heart math. I've done a bit of research into that. Yes,
And
yes, and you feel different too when you do that type of heart breathing exercise, connecting heart and mind.
and so the question is, what would a business that has a leadership team that are connected by head and heart within themselves, and then they work together, how would they operate differently inside their organization, and how would that allow that organization to be more nimble and more capable to then allow that organization to capitalize? I know I'm saying capitalize, but we do need money. It's what we use. It's a form of exchange, but we not money at all cost. Money that is happy money, money that is bringing value to more than just the sake of collecting money. Because one of my favorite quotes of all time is there was a billionaire playboy in the 60s, and he I think his dad owned ports and leased ports, and so he had a lot of money. He went to Hollywood, and he bought Marilyn Monroe, like he was involved in those circles, and he bought her a necklace or something like that. And somebody said of him, he was so poor, all he had was money.
It is a poor state. Yeah, if you've got nothing else, yeah, it doesn't matter how much you have. It doesn't buy happiness, as they
No,
say.
no.
The richest people in the world aren't the happiest generally.
And that's it. That the whole of our metric system is about acquiring more money and more physical things, or at least that's what we inherited. And because we've got the affluence nowadays where we've all got things that you couldn't have 100 years ago, we're in a situation now where we can go, actually, let's start valuing things that are other than money, like valuing, one of our friends in the groups you were talking, network groups you're talking about, he talks about 24 forms of wealth, of which money is just one of them. You've got friendships, you've got health, you've got all sorts of other ones. And how do we start valuing those inside of the financial equation when we're building organizations that really change the way the world works?
On that note, we'll leave it there, Tom, because I think it's food for thought. People think about how do we start valuing everything other than just what's the bottom line of an organization. You want to be in reality. We all want to be in a place where we enjoy who we're working with, what we're working on, delivering value and seeing a good end result for both us, the client, society, and everything in between. I think it becomes a bit of a sickness when it's just about the dollar, and it doesn't matter to what end. That's not going to drive happiness in any reality. It's just you can see win across many boards. You're happy to get up and go to work, and it's easy to get up and go to work and drive value and not pushing all the time. So yeah, I think everyone is, if they really sat down and reflected, that's what they'd want. Of a system or a business that's delivering value for everybody, themselves, their people, their clients, and beyond. There can be society and everyone in between. It's just, you want to work on a bigger mission. You want to serve a bigger problem. And I think the bigger we stretch as humans, the bigger we become anyway, and the more growth and opportunity we have to become bigger people. So there's a lot to think about there for everyone on this episode. It's gone in all different interesting places, probably a first for us to this extent, that's for sure. Have touching and murmurings around it, but yeah, it's been fascinating to hear of the futurists that died and yeah, the experience and the journey you've been on to date.
Thanks, Andrew. It's been an absolute pleasure being on with you today.